Nick Satinover's method of reductive flats using contact paper stencils for reduction. And I will intersperse some of the footage from his demonstration as a visiting artist along with my demo stone. First, you'll grain your stone down to 220 grit, and then you will want to measure it, and that will help you determine your paper size. So this stone is 16 inches by almost 20 inches, but I'm just going to call it 19 inches for simplicity. So you want to leave at least an inch on either side of your stone, and then you need an inch on the bottom and 2 inches on the top. So the leading edge, you need an inch for your hole punch registration, and then you need another inch that's just a buffer space. And so that will help you know your image size. So your image size in this case will be the 19-inch length minus 3 inches. So that will be 16 inches. And then the width would be 16 inches minus 2 inches, or I'm going to actually do an 1.5 inch buffer on the side. So minus 3 inches is 13 inches. So that's my actual image size. I wrote paper size, but that's not true because you need to put in paper that reaches the hole punches. And so your actual paper size is essentially the length of your stone minus an inch. So for me, that will be 13 inches by 18 inches. Now, I also need to consider my paper tearing. And so I want to be efficient with how I can use my paper, especially if you're on a budget. So I'm using Eastern paper, and it's 26 inches by 32 inches. So if I divide that into quarters, then I get 13 by 16 inches. Now, if I wanted, I could get 3 sheets that are 13 by 18 out of 1 sheet of mulberry paper. But I'd rather get 4 sheets. And so then I need to determine what my image size would be if I go with that. And that would be the 13 inches is the actual maximum image size if I'm doing a bleed. And then the 16 inches minus the 2 inches at the top that will be removed from the paper would leave me with a 13 by 14 inch image size. So I have to think about whether I'm okay with a composition that's a little bit more square. And I feel fine about that, so I'm going to go with that. But if you need your image to be that original size, like the 13 by 16 inch size, then you'll just have to use a little bit more paper. So this is all specific to my stone, and you'll have to do the same calculation based on your stone. And so this part that I'm hatching is my paper area on my stone that I've diagrammed. Once you figured out your paper size, then you can tear it down. So I am tearing down 8 sheets of paper at 13 by 16 inches, knowing that later I will be removing 2 inches from each sheet, and I'll be left with an image that is 13 by 14. Now, after that, you will need to tape the leading edge of your paper. I'm going to show you 2 options here. One option is to use clear tape and to put half of it on the front and then to carefully fold it over to the back. So I find this to be fairly tricky. Try to lay it down straight, and then if you start in the middle and fold it carefully and then kind of move to the outer edges and keep your paper flat while you do it, then it's less likely to wrinkle or curl, but it's a little bit of a challenge to do. And it kind of pulls on this light paper, as you can see. The other option is to use blue tape or masking tape to tape the leading edge that you'll be hole punching. And I find this to be a little bit easier to do. And I'm only taping one side in this case, although you could tape both sides if you wanted to be extra careful. So I just pull off a piece of tape that's a little bit longer than the paper, and then I try not to overhang it because it can stick. Then like the sheets, if you stack them, can stick to each other. And then I'll just fold those little corners over, and that shouldn't cause trouble during printing. So the reason that we tape our paper is to prevent the hole punch registration holes from loosening or swelling during printing, because they can get damp or they can stretch a little bit, and the tape is hardier than the paper. Another thing to consider is what is the front of your paper. So if I'm using Eastern paper, do I want the fuzzy side or the smoother side? And probably the answer is the smoother side. Those fuzzies can kind of come off in your ink, and the smoother texture should pick up a little bit easier when printing, kind of like the newsprint picks up well. After taping all of your sheets of paper, then you'll want to find the center point of each of your sheets of paper. So I am just scooting these sheets out so that I can see the leading edge of each of them. You can see that I chose to do 4 in the painter's tape and 4 with clear tape, just for demonstration purposes to try both. And my sheets may not be exactly the same size as one another, so that's the reason for centering them on each other. So if you had one that was a little bit wider, you could still center it and it would be fine. So I've got these staggered out now, and I can measure the center point on the one to the far left and then the one to the far right, and just draw a line connecting them, which will just be more strategic. We do have a ruler in the shop that has a center point, but I'm just using a regular ruler right now and finding center that way. And right now I am marking the front of my paper, because with the blue tape I decided to only tape the front, and that's the side that will be face down when I'm printing. And so I will have to transfer these marks to the back for the next step, but I wasn't really thinking about it in the moment. So do keep track of which side of your paper is the smooth side if you checked for that in the first place. Okay, so now I have a mark down the center of each of my sheets, and I can take these over to the hole punch to punch holes in them. And at this point, you'll also want to grab an aluminum piece that is a little bit narrower than the width of your stone to hole punch as well. I'm over here at our hole punch, and I am also finding the center for my piece of aluminum, and this is just a little bit wider than my paper. And then I also need to find center on the hole punch. And so I checked it out, and the 2 widest punches, their center is the very right side of the middle hole punch, if that makes sense. So that middle hole punch isn't centered, it's a little bit off center. And so I figured out a guiding mark for where I could hole punch all of my paper and my aluminum piece there. If your paper is too small to reach the 2 widest holes, then you'll want to center your paper between the 2 holes on the right because those are a little further apart than the 2 hole punches on the left. And if you need to do that, then you should find the center point between those 2 holes and mark it with a piece of tape, and that will show you where to line up your paper. So you want to make sure to punch your paper face down because that is the orientation that it will be printed. And you'll punch one sheet at a time, and you will line up your center point on your paper with the center point between the hole punches. And I didn't explicitly say this earlier, but perhaps you noticed that I hole punched my piece of aluminum. So I also centered that, and I decided which face would be upward facing, and I punched it in that orientation because that's how it will be attached to my stone and how it will be oriented during printing. Once you have hole punched all of your sheets for your addition and your piece of aluminum, then you can return to your stone. Next, you will attach your aluminum piece to your stone directly. So you'll need 2 registration tabs, which I will distribute to you, and a little bit of double stick tape. And use this sparingly, but put some just along the piece of aluminum periodically, and then you will adhere that to the top of your stone. Before you do that, you should snap in your hole punches, and they should be a nice tight fit. But my aluminum bent a little bit when I put that one in, so I'll try to kind of squish it down better so it's a tighter fit there. And then I was noticing that I was putting the hole punches further away from my paper, and I'd rather have them closer to my paper. So I flipped this around here like so, and I'm just trying to find center on my stone, put it toward the edge, and stick it down. Next, you'll use a piece of duct tape to tape over the top of your registration tab system. You'll need to cut around the registration pins, otherwise the duct tape won't lay flat. So you can kind of cut out a little bit of a square so that it can comfortably lay down, and then kind of move along from one direction to the other, from one end to the other. Make sure you adhere the duct tape thoroughly to the stone so that your registration never moves. And you can fold the flaps down, but make sure they are shorter than the height of the stone so that you don't run the risk of any amount of tape just kind of wrapping under your stone at any point. All right, so now we are ready to figure out where our paper lies on our stone, and it should be relatively centered. But you can just kind of trace where your paper falls by putting it face down on the punch registration system you've just made, and that will show you your image area. If you're going to do a bleed print, then you would want to gum outside of that line a little bit. But if you wanted to have margins, you would need to account for where those margins would fall on your paper and gum accordingly. So here I'm just drawing in that buffer space that's an inch away from the registration pins. And that buffer is necessary as you're inking and sponging so that you don't hit those tabs. All right, so now we can talk about transferring an image to the stone. I have done a minimal preparatory drawing for my demo, and I have transferred the drawing onto the back of my newsprint using a light table so that it is reversed because I came up with a composition, and when I print it will reverse, so I need to plan accordingly and reverse my image. You can use red iron oxide paper to transfer your image to the stone. This piece is a little small, but it is good enough for the image that I have. But if you had a more detailed image, you would want to pick a piece that fits underneath your entire drawing. And now I am using a ballpoint pen to trace over my key points of my drawing, and they will transfer to my stone with the red iron oxide. And this would give me a sense of where to gum out my borders and any other white areas. But I'm also going to show you how to draw your image into your stone with Sharpie so that you have a residue of your drawing throughout this entire process. You could also draw directly with graphite onto your stone if you wanted to lay in your preliminary drawing that way. Because we're going to ink up the entire stone, I'm not as concerned about the grease on my hands or any kind of residue that might be on the ruler that I'm using. And normally you would be really careful with the surface of your stone, like if you were drawing on it with crayon or something. So I also am laying in an additional component of my drawing here just by using a ruler, because I knew it would be annoying to draw it and then redraw it and then redraw it again when I could just do it right on the stone, because I wanted to make some bands going across the image that start out thick and they get thinner and thinner in a systematic way and start to space out as they go down. And so I'm just measuring the intervals and then I'm laying that in as a baseline for my image. Just eyeballing the horizontality of these stripes, or trying to get kind of a right angle. And I'm okay with it being a little bit handmade looking, but if I wanted perfect square, then I could use a T-square to do this. Once I get all of these lines laid in, then I can gum out the areas that I want to stay white. So that will be the edges of my stone and any image areas that I want to be pure white. Now I'm using the border gum to stencil out the areas I want to remain white. And I have this video sped up ×8 because this is a little bit time intensive. I'm using a brush that does have some metal on it, but I'm trying to not let the gum reach that part of the brush because I needed one that was a little bit more detailed than the plastic or wooden brushes that we have. But I don't want the gum to corrode the metal either. If you wanted to do this the way Nick Satinover does it, then you could put down a layer of contact paper and cut a stencil and then apply gum arabic anywhere that you removed from the contact paper. Then let that dry, then remove the contact paper stencil. And so in effect, you have the same thing happening, but you've just used a cut stencil instead of painting by hand for what you want to stay white. And because I'm doing a bleed print, I am painting my gum arabic a little bit outside of my image area and then right up to my buffer zone because I'll be tearing that side down anyway. And this is meant to be kind of a spacey image, so I'm adding these tiny little stars. and they're a little bit reminiscent of the dots that Nick used in his print as well. Now that my gum Arabic has dried, I went in and I Sharpied over everywhere in my drawing that I wanted to keep throughout this process. And because it was time intensive to draw those stripes, I just decided to not show you that. Now I am removing as much Sharpie as I can with isopropyl alcohol and a blue shop towel. And I'm just checking to see if the Sharpie is finished coming up. And I am just going to continue doing this until my shop towel comes up clean. Because alcohol is a degreaser, it is removing the toner from the Sharpie and just leaving a stain, and it won't affect my printing later. So this is kind of a cool trick so that you have a kind of a key image to work with throughout the process. That said, this is optional, so if you want to work more like a pirate and less like a ninja, you don't necessarily have to do this Sharpie step. Next, you will rub up with Johnson's paste wax. So this should be a familiar step. And then you will do the roll up. So first you'll need to wash the gum out, and you can see I have some thick areas of gum that I need to dissolve before I start sponging and inking. And at this point you should be able to see a different color on the stone where you have your stenciled areas with the gum Arabic versus where it should ink up black. Now that I've sponged off the gum, I'm ready to start sponging for inking up, and I have my roll-up mixture on my leather roller, and I'm just going to ink this up until I see a solid black everywhere. There's a spot on my stone toward the top that isn't inking up quite as well, and I'm not sure if it's because of the way my brayer is or if there's like a slight low spot on my stone. So I'm just rolling at a variety of angles to try to catch that spot so that I have a nice solid black. Do be mindful of the registration pins because you could damage the rollers if you hit them hard or try to roll over them. And same with the sponge, those pins will shred the sponge pretty easily if you hit it. So just try to avoid those pins. You can see I've been rolling for quite a while to make sure I've established a solid background. Once you finish rolling up your flat, then you can fan your stone dry, and then you can rosin and talc. Then you are ready to do a 10-drop etch. I did mine for about 3 minutes, and then I freshened with pure gum and buffed it down, and then you will wait at least 1 hour before printing. My phone died while I was doing that etch, so I don't have a video of it, but you've done this before, and your stone should look something like Nick's did after you buff down your gum. And after you wait an hour, you will be ready to print.